You've been involved in gold for a long time. What's your origin story? How did you first become interested in it? What was your first encounter? What made you think this shiny heavy metal was important?
Well, everything started with a book I purchased in, I think, 2001. It was called Gold Wars from Ferdinand Lips. So it was a book about monetary history, how money came into existence. In 2000, when we had Enron, Swissair, MCI, and then 9/11, of course, and I only heard, that Greenspan was saying, we can print as much money, and everyone was cheering Greenspan, saying, yeah, perfect, the guy really knows what to do. And I was sitting there and I thought, hey, I have no clue what they're talking about. I don't understand the world I am in. And so basically I started to dig a bit deeper. And fortunately, I found this book about monetary history, and then I got in touch with Ferdinand Lips. So he pointed me out to the classic liberals. He told me, read Wilhelm Röpke, Friedrich August von Hayek, Ludwig von Mises. And that was the beginning of my journey. And then I think it took 2004, I started buying physical gold for the first time. And since then, I knew that I somehow want to move into the physical gold business. I understood that sound money is necessary for a sound society. And I also understood, that central planning is always a problem. I also understood that politics is always the problem and never the solution. And that, led me then basically to where I am today.
It's interesting you mentioned Ferdinand Lips in the U.S. I don't think he's a very well-known person, but in my studies I came across him, and I heard a story that I don't know if it's true or not, that he was speaking to some bankers in Washington, D.C., and said to them that the average Swiss peasant knows more about gold than the average American banker.
Well, yeah, I think that's absolutely possible, because it's also the truth.
I would say probably both true and offensive at the same time. I don't think he made many friends with that remark. What do you think? Do you perceive a difference between how U.S. Americans view gold versus the Swiss or the Germans?
Honestly, most of my customers, I would say I have 50% of my customer base is coming from the United States. And the other 50% basically, from all over the world. So I think, certain Americans understand real money. They also understand how an economy basically would work. They also understand that, that this big experiment that we are in is going to end. So I think decent, humble people who can think for themselves independently, who are questioning some basic stuff, who ask the basic questions or thought about basic questions. Where is money coming from? How money came into existence? Is it good that we have money which is depreciating over time? Private property rights, stuff like that.
Depreciating money creates jobs and exports and prosperity, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the Keynesian viewpoint. In a credit-based system, it has to grow, and people have to consume faster, and at the same time you have to make sure that you keep products cheap. So that's why the US sold out their industry to China, for example. Quite a lot of the Western world did that, of course, because they just opened up the slave market. By doing this, they were able to still get the products for cheap price and still make a good margin on it. But this is always going for a certain period of time, then it's over. Yeah, and credit, you can fill up a house with credit up to the roof, but one fine day it's over. And that's basically where we are. I think the world really has changed. I think the current system is really coming to an end. Everything has an end. Only the sausage has two. And we are now, what people have been told in universities, most of it is absolutely nonsense. It doesn't make sense. It's intellectual idiocy. How do you say that in English? But, people are completely confused.
I have a concept that I call the sniff test, and that is to something pass a basic, quick inspection. And so, perfect example of this, some alleged economist on Twitter said that there's only one reason why people own houses, and that is it provides rent control. It doesn't pass the sniff test. I think if you ask 10 people who own a house, why do you own a house? You're going to get 10 different reasons. So for the economics profession, so-called, to go and declare these things, nobody really believes that. That's absurd. But they say it because it helps them on their way to some other politically useful conclusion where they want to impose a certain policy. And these rationalizations serve to, bolster that policy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so getting back to the question about how Americans view gold versus other people, I've had an opportunity so before COVID, I was traveling more than 50% of the time and mostly outside the US. So I had a chance to spend a lot of time. I think I met with you once or twice in Zurich,
Yep.
but I've met with a lot of people in most of the European countries and many of the countries in Southeast Asia and other places. I always try to be alert to, the difference between my perceptions and my values and my take on things versus as an American versus how other people perceive things. I ended up thinking that, I still do think that Americans probably understand gold the least of anybody in the world. And it's because, we've been in the fortunate position of not experiencing hyperinflations and currency collapses and, the kind of disruptions, obviously total war. There's a lot of things that have happened in other places in the world where nobody's had the luxury of taking the currency for granted as Americans have had. Arguably Canada is similar. And so Americans just put it out of mind and just said, well, I'm sure that the Fed isn't going to let that happen or something, which is a very naive, well, I'm sure it's fine. And they do a little bit of hand waving, have another glass of wine, Of course, something is going on in the world today that's never gone on before, which is the entire world has gone all in, as they say in the game of Texas Hold'em poker. Every country in the world is betting on the same exact system, which is this dollar-based irredeemable currency that's been severed from gold, and every country in the world is in on it. We've never had that before. Whenever one country or another has had their money collapse, there's always been other countries that had a much better monetary system. And so aid and capital and investment could come in from other places that weren't ruined, by the event in that particular country. But today, when it happens, it will be global, and there won't be any place from outside that can come in and invest or, deploy capital, which makes this particularly scary.
Yeah, the US really had the checkbook, World Currency Reserve. They had the freedom. Instead of paying, international trades in gold, they basically were able to print as much dollars as they wanted. That's what Charles de Gaulle called the exorbitant privilege, with the Bretton Woods agreement. And so, of course, it's like the Cantillon effect, so America really has been the key leader of the world, and at the same time, the biggest central bank. And with the US dollar becoming the world currency reserve, it has also corrupted a lot of the American society, like everywhere, of course. But I think America really, that's why it's the biggest capital market. The biggest debt market, credit market, and for the other countries, it was perfect. It was really going. We have lived the last 50 years. Look at the total debt of the United States. Everything has been done. 99% have been done since 1971 when Nixon went off the gold standard. We really had the debt.
It doubles about every 8 years, right?
Yeah, I think today even faster.
Right.
It's going into this exponential curve at the end of the day. But people are completely decoupled from how a real economy is working. They don't even understand that first you have to produce and to save so that you're able to invest. Today, people believe, just take on credit and consume. And this has been the story for the past decades. And this is also at the same, when people don't save any longer, then it's a destruction of civilization. And I think that's what we are witnessing for a longer period, several decades already, and now it's really coming towards the end. We also have these cycles, these long-term debt cycles, Jubilee, which we already had in the Bible, 50 years. The slaves are freed, that's forgiven. It's completely absurd what we are witnessing today in the markets. What's going on, in the mainstream media? Everything is fake. Everything is fake. Then you have the sheeps who basically go with the flow and are investing. They don't own. An investor is completely different than an owner. People are not used to own things 100%. Everyone is invested in something which is driven up by artificial credit, and it has been a great party. But now, the sound is getting calmer, and soon the dancing most likely is also going to stop.
To your comment about saving, what's the incentive to save if the interest rate is zero or negative?
Well, absolutely. That has been the message, for at least since 2008. Mm-hmm. The message was basically, hey, don't save, take on credit, consume as fast and as much as you can. And here is the credit. If you want to know how much money is worth, then try to go and borrow it. So, if you get the money almost for free, then it's worth not that much.
Easy come, easy go.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think a lot in terms of incentives. What is the incentive saying to people if savings get no return or even negative return, and borrowing every day, borrowing becomes cheaper?
Yeah.
What is the incentive that encourages people? What is that encouraging them to do? You made a comment earlier about the corruption of the system corrupts everybody. If the top of the system is funny money and dishonest, do a lot of people look at that and say, well, if they can do that, why shouldn't I do this? It's a very, subtle effect that undermines any desire for people to act ethically. Of course, now, I don't know if you saw the news that so far 2 regional Fed presidents have resigned. I'm sorry, not resigned, announced their retirement due to health. Well, one of them said health. The other one, got caught with his hand in the cookie jar, trading his personal account. And these are multi-million-dollar trades. That's the interesting thing. A day before the Fed would make a major announcement of a policy, he was trading his personal account. And it was things like S&P futures. So not investments, but just, a bet on, how the markets were going to react to what the Fed was going to do next. It's not surprising to me, and I'd love your take on this as well, but it's not surprising to me that the people who are in power are seeking, personal gain from it. That's not the surprising part at all. The surprising part is how brazen and blatant it was that nobody thought anything of this. That nobody thought, maybe this is going to be a problem. Maybe this is going to be on the front page of, New York Times or Zero Hedge. Maybe I don't want to do this. There's a term that Bastiat coined almost 200 years ago. So everyone says this is insider trading. Yeah. And my argument is, no, insider trading is when you trade based on what you know. This is different. These people are trading based on what they have the power to do to you. And so Bastiat coined a term that he called spoliation.
Okay.
Which is related to taking the spoils, as in like the spoils of, an armed robbery or murder or war. You're grabbing the spoils. I think the world should adopt that term for when politicians and central bankers are, trading to profiteer on their own policy decisions. Do you have any comment or thoughts on this?
Yeah, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely, of course. And I think what we have witnessed over the past decades, there is corruption everywhere. And as you mentioned before, this insider trading, it's not even, if you are in the right position, political, then I think you're even protected. They really do whatever they want to do. We can see it also now with the whole Corona pandemic, the mass media campaign. Everyone that is basically a bit still sane, sound, realizes that it's smelly, it stinks. And that it's amazing how orchestrated, lies can be pushed out. Misinformation can be pushed. The fake news debate came not because of alternative news. The fake news debate came up because people realized that all the mass media, most of it is really bullshit. And once you understand the system we are in and the lies and the framing on TV and in the media, once you realize that this is all bullshit, then you're just watching in front of the TV and you're laughing what they are telling you.
I have a thing that I say sometimes, which is, you have to laugh because otherwise you have to cry.
Absolutely. Even now, I'm surprised to see how many people really started. The awakening started really last year in March, because up to then I had lots of friends of mine, happy life. They always told me, Claudio, I understand the system. I'm doing fine. As long as I make more than inflation, everything is okay. Mm-hmm. I have a house, mortgage, a few cars, nice apartment. It's okay. And then when that stuff happened in March, with 40 people dying in a 12 million city in Wuhan, and the world decided to close down and to ground fleets and so on, some people realized, hey, this is now, what's going on? This is completely insane. Since then, the brave ones, the ones who try to understand, the ones who still can think independently, and are brave enough to ask certain questions. They get it. I would say here in Switzerland, most likely we'll talk about roughly 20% of the people. And the rest are really servants. They are sticking to the system. They are afraid. They also realize something is smelly. They realize that the world has already changed, but they still hope for the nanny state, that the nanny state will take care of them. They don't want to hear about these big moves and changes because they are just scared. Or they are extremely profiting from the current system. So they don't want to hear about it anyway. But I think society has shifted and society is divided. And that's where we cannot bring it together any longer. I think, one solution fits it all. I think that's over because this vaccine, I think that's the red line for a lot of people. 18 months ago, I already had the feeling, that Corona is the end of the nation state. We had the First World War, the old transformation, from the monarchistic old structures into nation states, Second World War into ideologies. And now basically this is, the big agenda behind Corona, of course, is, the new Green Deal. The useful idiots from the Melon Fraction Party, outside green, inside red, in the core brown. They push, for this new green economy, CO2 emission free. That will bring us back, to the Middle Ages.
In the United States, the governor of Arizona, but I think all the governors did this, divided businesses and workers into two categories: essential and non-essential. And did you have anything like that in Switzerland?
Well, also over here, basically politics. We only know that from totalitarian or authoritarian systems.
That's where I was going with that, is you can see where that leads very obviously. I don't think you need to be a PhD in sociology to understand, once you declare a group of people to be non-essential, and then you say, well, these people, of course, have to be forced to be unemployed, and then we have to give them your money because they have to live. Then they become an overt parasite class. You've already labeled them non-essential. It's not too many steps to say, let's exterminate them, right?
Yeah.
I don't think the culture in the Western world is ready for that just yet. I think these take time to bubble up and ferment, and it takes more events and more things and more propaganda before people will be ready to return to the 1930s ideologically. But it's a very scary, that to me, there's a couple of things that really hit me, particularly as an American citizen, because we have this constitution that gets in the politicians' way all the time. There were two other things that they were talking about that they didn't do, but they were talking about it openly, and it became, are you familiar with the Overton window? What's the spectrum of allowable discussion or debate?
Okay.
The Overton window moved pretty far to the authoritarian because there were two things that were being discussed. And one is for states that temporarily had lower COVID rates, that they were talking about prohibiting travel from people from other states. Now, the US Constitution is pretty clear that people and goods and money have to be allowed to flow freely between the states. In fact, that was the meaning of regulated interstate commerce. It didn't mean impose 100,000 pages of what we call regulation. It meant to make it regular and not allow any state to get greedy or xenophobic and lock out, their neighbors. That came on the table. And the other one was that they were talking about, Trump was talking about, if an American citizen was visiting a foreign country that had a high COVID rate, then maybe we wouldn't allow the US citizen back into the US, which, if they tried to do that, would be a constitutional crisis. How can you not allow a citizen back into the country? And so when these things are proposed, it tears at the fabric of the entire political, legal, constitutional system. And if those things go, then what else would go? Because anything goes. They can do anything they want, and the people are just, either living in fear or cheering it on and, demanding more. Some of those things were very, very concerning.
To me, when Corona started, to me, it was always an attempt of a kind of, that's the cultural revolution for the Western civilization, for the Western world. I compare it with the Bolshevik revolution in Russia or with Mao in China. So now what we are witnessing with Corona is basically a cultural revolution in the Western world, because it's going against individualism. It's really the fight between individualism and collectivism. At the same time, it started decades ago. The Russian propaganda, the Soviet propaganda, they invested the most amount of money in propaganda. They also understood that individualism is more superior, and that's why one of their goals was to destroy Western values, such as self-responsibility, man is born free, we are not a means to an end, freedom of speech, freedom of choice, private property needs to be protected. Basically, that's all at stake. And Corona basically canceled all those values which made the Western world so successful. And then this cancel culture, of course, and all that stuff. We were the only culture that decided to end slavery. And not because a king or a president decided, because people came to the conclusion, first of all, that it's not right. And second, they also understood that slavery is more expensive than when people are working freely because they have a different motivation, and a hardworking person, if he can make his own money and is free, he will always be more productive than slaves. And now they even basically are telling us that we are the guys responsible for slavery and all that stuff, and that capitalism and industrialization has been an exploitation of people. I also believe they're not going to succeed to destroy Western culture, Western civilization. I was shocked, of course, because I also did a movie. I started a movie as a friend of mine, Planet Lockdown. So basically, last year we were already traveling around doing interviews with epidemiologists, virologists, professor of economics, statesmen, private entrepreneurs, because we wanted to show the impact of Corona, not from this flu and fear perspective. We also wanted to show the implications of that political doctrine when it comes to a free society, when it comes to the global economy, when it comes to the international, the division of labor, for example. I think a lot of people in the West realize that this is the big agenda behind it, but it's still a small minority. People just lack imagination. They cannot even imagine that government can go bankrupt these days.
I think in the US, at least specifically regarding lockdown and COVID, I think it's not a small minority. I think it's a big minority. I think it's probably 40-something percentage points of the population are sick of lockdown and that either changed their view, that originally believed in lockdown and now come to realize that this is a big power grab by the politicians. Or I know several people that at the beginning they said 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And there were a lot of people that said, okay, if it's 2 weeks and this is going to avoid, people dying, in the hallways, in the hospitals, to avert this, humanitarian crisis, sure, we'll agree to this. But then at the end of 2 weeks, of course, it wasn't over. That was only just beginning. So I think there's a lot of people, at least in the US, that are, increasingly upset about lockdown and increasingly demanding that all the lockdowns go away. And so, you have states like Arizona here, there is no COVID policy anymore in Arizona. There's no mask, there's no vaccine, you can get the vaccine if you want it, but there's no requirement to wear a mask. There's no limits on gatherings indoors or anything like that. And in fact, the governor went pretty far as to prohibit any government agency from requiring a mask or a vaccine.
Okay.
If you're a private business, then obviously you can demand masks if you want. Most in Arizona do not do that because it's not popular with the customers. Other states still have various mask measures, and they're talking about vaccine passports and all these things. So I think it's pretty close to 50-50 here in the US.
Okay. That's, perfect. The US, we have the cultural roots of freedom. That's really, part of the US history, of the old narrative. People went to the US because of more freedom and more liberty and the Constitution. And the Americans I know, they are all freedom-loving individuals. Over here in Europe, people seem to be a bit more obedient. Also here in Switzerland, we always had a weak government. We don't have one president, we have 7 of these guys, for example. So the division of power was always granted in a way. And then, of course, our government, we had a weak government up to 20 years ago. You haven't seen any, pictures when it comes to political campaigns and so on. We only knew that in Germany, but not in Switzerland. Okay, that has changed in the last 20 years. But, 20 years ago, it was, when we were still on a gold standard. Switzerland was really in a good shape, but the last 20 years, I think all over the world, everything has been pushed out. This globalization. And globalization means no borders. No borders means no private property. You don't have definition of private property, clear definitions. And man is becoming, a global citizen. And
let me just share my perception of one change that occurred in Switzerland. So, as listeners would know, and as you may know, I built and sold a software company in 2008. It was a company called Diamondware, and I sold it to Nortel Networks. The transaction closed August 19, 2008, right before everything began to collapse.
Perfect.
So at first, I was just staring at the markets with amusement. But as I began to realize how serious it was, that was the beginning of my international travels. I looked at, how do I protect myself, get money out of the country, all those things. So I visited Zurich and I had a meeting with I'm not going to say who because that's not really the point, but a private bank that focuses on probably wealthy expats. I don't know how much Swiss business they do, but they focused on people like me. Although at that point, the American government had started to become pretty aggressive with tax reporting.
Yeah.
So a lot of the Swiss financial institutions didn't want to talk to Americans at all. But anyways, they were happy to talk to me. But somehow the topic came up of TARP and TALP and quantitative easing and all these things that were all these new buzzwords that were implemented in either late 2008 or early 2009. And I think I was in Switzerland in maybe spring of 2009. So all these things had happened. I was talking to this, senior vice president of this bank, or whatever his title was. He was pretty high up in the bank, saying this is crazy. And he corrected me and he said, well, when you have a crisis, it's necessary to, print money and to go into debt, and deficit spending and money printing is necessary. This is what this Swiss private banker said to me. I walked out of the meeting just kind of shaken up that this is somebody that I would have thought would be in agreement that you can't do this, that there's terrible consequences. I learned that, at least I don't know if he's typical of the private banking industry in Switzerland or not. I didn't have that conversation with enough people to have a sample size and do a study, but it blew me away to hear that being said by that person. This wasn't some socialist, spray painting a hammer and sickle on the front of a jewelry store on Bahnhofstrasse. This was, a banker catering to big clients, and I'm sure himself personally worth a lot, saying, yeah, we need to print money and go into debt.
Yeah. I mean, I know some old Swiss bankers, but they had the concept of personal liability. They were not in the credit business. Yeah, it was to find out if the person that shows up is an entrepreneur, that he made his money in a right way. Because Switzerland was a neutral nation, the old private bankers, they knew if just because the Americans are saying this is the enemy, that doesn't need to be the truth. It's all about geopolitics, and we had this neutral position in Switzerland. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we had, I think it really started in the 90s, middle of the 90s, when you had this whole MBA culture, American coming over to the west of the world. And then everyone was talking about, okay, globalization, think global, act local, all these bullshit words. And of course, also in Switzerland, we were running on the gold standard until the year of 2000. And then our government basically told us, okay, we have to modernize the constitution. We are not going to take out or make big changes. They never told the people that they basically take out the gold backing, which was part of the constitution. 40% needs to be backed up. So and then we had Credit Suisse, UBS. They also wanted to join the race for big money. So they purchased First Boston and Warburg. So they also became a global player with a strong affiliation to the United States, direct access to the Federal Reserve, primary dealer status, and so on. And then basically the party started, and all these banks they completely changed. They really became.
So more examples of when it's corrupt at the top, the corruption trickles down to all the other layers.
Absolutely. And once, the banking system, we had this. Back then, we had this Wegelin bank, Mr. Hummler. He was one of these old private bankers. He believed that he is a Swiss living in a sovereign nation, and then that's why he also took American customers on board, believing that when they come from a Swiss bank that he might make his share, whatever. But he thought we are sovereign, independent, and he was threatened, by the US that he would lose access to US dollar. And of course, if you're in the banking system and you don't have access to US dollars, you're out, you're gone. You're not part of that system any longer. Even in 2000, we had this under Clinton, when we basically got accused that we were the guys prolonging Second World War, that the Swiss were doing all these gold trades, and we made a fortune and so on. It's all bullshit. They really also destroyed Switzerland. That has always been my point of view, because Switzerland is the antidote to the current system, because it's really non-centralized. It used to be non-centralized. It used to be based on the principles of subsidiarity. Everything from the bottom up, based on, like Aristotle has always said, demos, the village, kratia, the rulers. A democracy can work, but on a very low scale. You have to limit the ambitions of the politicians. You have to limit also the wishes of the people. If you have a structure where basically I in Zug can decide something and the guys in Geneva have to pay for it, that's just not going to work. We even also we lost our decentralized model. Our federal government was trying to gain more power, grasp more power, and so that's how also our country has changed.
You have to restrain the politicians and the people. A point that I make often is that it's the people that are demanding this and pushing this the politicians simply have to, now they can try to propagandize something, but ultimately it has to be popular. Otherwise, any politician who tries to go against the popular will be voted out of office. So ultimately, it's the voters that are deciding that they want you to be restricted in some way, or they want you to be taxed to give them some benefit. That's the thing that, in the United States now, I think it started when Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Richard Branson were all talking about or flying into space on their, rockets. People took a look at this with envy and said, hey, why do these billionaires get to fly to space? And meanwhile, there's always some need somewhere. There's always a child without a pair of shoes or whatever. They should be taxed the rich.
Yeah.
The politicians are certainly, some of them, Elizabeth Warren is certainly calling for this, but so are 30 or 40% of the people. And then another 20 or 30 or 40% really aren't sure whether that's going to benefit them or not. And then there's another 30% maybe that don't want any more taxes on the rich or anybody else. And that's the damnable fact of how politics works. And the unjust idea that you can propose, there's probably 30% of the people that, would support it.
Yeah. I mean, the free lunch myth is still, what the people are looking for. I mean, and a very high time preference. I want to have everything now. This is in the nature of man, and so that has been exploited by the politicians, of course, and by this credit-based system. But I'm always saying, in a credit-based system, money is never an issue, or currency is never an issue. It's always the scarcity of goods and services. And when it comes to goods and services, now where we're standing today, there we are in a heavy deflationary environment. And when it comes to monetary supply and so on, it's basically inflationary. So I think that's an additional booster, for hyperinflation in the future. So, everything comes to an end. If you don't know the history, then you're doomed to repeat it. And look at all, Karl Marx always said, the task of a philosopher is not to interpret history, has to change it. And when I see, in the US or even Europe, all this de-illusioned yaus, which is basically tearing down statues, trying to destroy, history, good or bad, I think it's important. It's part of our culture. And if we destroy everything and we take away the history of the people, then they become really a kind of mass manipulation tool. You can do everything with them. And when I look into history books, I love to read. I love history, but the more I read, the more I understand. How do I know if this is true? If we only look, history has always been written by the winners, and so maybe I don't know what Napoleon did in the past. I don't know if this is true or not. Maybe it's all bullshit. Maybe it's all fake. But without freedom, anything else is worth nothing at the end of the day. And I don't want to end up.
If there's no free marketplace for ideas, then a lie can win. As long as people are free to be able to talk, then...
to enlighten themselves by reasoning, having open discussions, not being afraid to say something and that somebody else put you in jail because it does not go along with the official narrative. This is really, this is totalitarian. I discussed with Václav Klaus last year in November when I was in Prague doing this Planet Lockdown documentary. I was talking about what he thinks about social distancing, self-quarantine, human interaction becomes a medical threat. And he basically told me, Claudio, we know that. We know that from communism. It's basically the basis for every totalitarian system. First of all, you have to destroy the horizontal relationships.
Right.
And this is what we are witnessing now for 18 months. And this is also what we can see in society. It's still working. There is nothing new under the sun. It's always divide and conquer, fear and control. This time we basically witnessed with Corona also shock and awe. Really this military psyop, American doctrine of shock and awe. It's crazy. It's horrible. I would never have thought that something like this can happen and would be possible. But at the end,
you put everybody behind a mask, so you can't even recognize your friends anymore, and then you make everybody.
It's a muscle. The mask is the muscle. Just shut up and take it. And we are going into this new green. Great reset, but the message was, shut up. Slaves. A sign of slaves is, these muscles. They always have.
But then the second part is they make everybody fear their friends and their neighbors, which destroys the relationships between people, and everybody has to turn to the government as the only source you can trust.
Yeah.
And
trust is key in a society. Without trust, you don't have a sound society.
So switching topics, do you have any thoughts on the coming implementation of Basel III regulations for the gold trade?
I mean, honestly, for me, I believe it's irrelevant. I mean, the central banks are becoming irrelevant in the future. I don't believe that. I know that it's the old system. And I think the best people can do today is try to get out of that system as soon as possible, because otherwise, you're going to end up with you own nothing and you will be happy, because the banking system, that's the old world, and I think it's going to end anyway. Basel III and all these regulations, I don't care. Doesn't make a difference. I don't know how the world will look like in 6 months' time. I have no clue. I think now we are going into one of these hot periods, because really now governments, I mean, they want to destroy the current system. I mean, we know lockdowns don't work, but they're still doing it. And now they basically have society divided. They push these vaccine passports in Italy, in France, in the UK, in Australia. And I think this winter will be harsher than the past 18 months. But I think people are going to riot. And that's also what these sociopaths who are ruling, the centralized system are looking for. But you have to destroy an old system to create a new one. Chaos out of order. As long as you can keep the people in this dialectic, the Hegelian dialectic, problem, reaction, solution. You provoke, you create the problem, you provoke reaction, then you come up with a solution, and then you restart again. And as long as the people are part of that dialectic, I mean, then they will be always captured. So to me, I already said 18 months ago, I'm not part of that. I'm pro or against any longer. I take a step back. I watch it as an observer, and I basically don't take part in that Muppet show any longer. I just exit the system as good as I can, and I started the thinking process how I can protect me and my family and my friends. Basically we started an initiative here in Ticino, where we have our own small municipality off grid, where we like to attract like-minded individuals so that they come up there. And we can prepare for what is coming. But to me, the future is decentralized. I don't see that World Economic Forum, Great Reset, Chinese surveillance, modern monetary theory, and universal basic income bullshit. It's not going to work. Central planning never worked. It will not work also in the future. And we are at the end of fiat is going down the drain. And just by replacing paper with a centralized digital banking coin, why should the people accept such a deal? I mean, you want to switch from bullshit to another bullshit? I mean, it's a joke.
I don't think they will. And one of my theories is that credit only works when people are willing to grant it. When we say, fiat currency is going to collapse, a great part of that is going to be a collapse in the willingness to extend trust. Then there's no way for them to declare, that currency didn't work. Well, here's another currency. It's a central bank digital currency. It's an IMF strategic drawing rights currency. You can't, once that cat is out of the bag, you can't get that cat back into the bag by just declaring a new currency.
Yeah.
Destroy the trust. The trust would have to be earned from zero, from the beginning, all over again.
Right.
Which is one of the reasons why I think this collapse will be horrific. It will be, if this collapse comes and nothing is done to avert it, this will be like the collapse of Rome. There'll be a dark age to follow, because there'll be the collapse of trust, and nobody will extend any kind of credit, any kind of long-term contract. It's cash on the barrelhead only. And I think that's a consequence of destruction of trust and credit on the scale that they're doing right now. Why should anybody trust anybody else if this is how the world works?
Yeah. I mean, everything is absurd. It's completely absurd, and everything is fake, and everything is manipulated. Everything is. So
just to touch on one more absurdity, on top of all the other absurdities, negative interest rates, which came to Switzerland first, and now has spread like a cancer to many other countries, including Japan and obviously Europe. What do you think of negative interest rates?
It's completely insane. I mean, it's nonsense, of course. I mean, it's destroying the system anyway. As you said, the system is going to collapse when people lose trust in the institution. Even I look at this big Netflix series, the way government politicians is presented. They're all crooks, they're all bandits, they're criminals, they're murderers. So I mean, I even sometimes I have the feeling that a lot of different interest groups which are part of that system they are actively working to destroy the trust in the institutions. So that's why I believe, like this George Soros, chaos out of order. They also have no clue they know that it's going to the end. Corona has been a great scapegoat, so that the people don't believe that government and central banks are responsible for the crash, because they are responsible for the crash, so they can blame it now on Corona. They had to shut down to protect the people and so on. But I think, in the future, people will realize that this has all been a psyop, a military psyop on a global scale, and that it's all bullshit. And hopefully, the good stuff right now is the Swiss people. I'm now in this gold business for 12, 30 years professionally. I have never seen so many Swiss people buying gold. And it's not the big ones, but it's mainly, the smaller guys, 20,000, 5,000, 25,000. Some of my partners are up 400% in terms of new customers. So, the little guy on the street, which is not intellectually brainwashed, they get it. They still have, the right instincts. They understand that this cannot work. And that whatever they are talking, the freaks, the anointed experts, the intellectual idiots, they don't believe them any longer. They don't believe that it makes sense. The narrative switching from flattening the curve, then, the hospital emergency capacities and all that stuff. Here in Switzerland, for example, they reduced the emergency capacity by almost 50% over the last 7 months.
Switching to one last topic, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies versus gold.
Okay, yeah. I still prefer gold. I still prefer tangible. I can own it. I have it. It's physically, it's there. Because, also these WEF guys and great reset guys, they're talking about taking down the grid. When we look at the bigger agenda, green, new economy, blah, blah, we're just going to have huge problems with electricity, power supply, and so on. So I think, and the internet as such is still centralized. So we really have to develop a fully decentralized internet. But the concept of cryptocurrencies, blockchain, the digitalization, peer-to-peer as such, I think that's the future. That's part of the future. We are right now standing also at the kind of dot-com bubble 2.0. And when you think about 20 years ago, the big players are not around any longer. And maybe Bitcoin can make it, maybe not, because all these exchanges strongly regulated. Everyone wanted to come get the banking license. The hashtag where Bitcoin has been created is coming from the NSA. So I don't know. It's still a pure speculation, but I always embrace, don't get me wrong. I embrace cryptos and so on. I think that's really part of the solution also of the future, but it needs to be fully decentralized.
I can certainly see, having been a computer software developer and having worked on architectures that were decentralized versus centralized, the scalability, the single points of failure. We have this system today where in order to transfer a dollar to somebody else, it has to go through one single choke point, which of course is enormously pleasing to the person who controls that choke point, but doesn't necessarily serve anybody else. And I think there's something about gold that lends itself to being distributed and, if not peer-to-peer, at least many to many different vaults and different participants in a network, and not one central bank, but not one central clearinghouse necessary for, transfers of gold to go through.
Absolutely. What is the function of money? It has basically two functions: medium of exchange and store of value. That's the way it should be in a free market. That's also what the people
add a third, which is to finance productive activity. It has to earn interest for savers, and it has to be borrowed and finance growth and production capacity.
Absolutely. That's why you get the interest rate when you lean out, or when you give money to somebody else to invest and so on, and you basically don't consume, or you have a certain risk not to get it back. That's why you get an interest rate or a risk premium for this. It has always been like this. It can be also in the future. That would be sound, and I think we're also going to go back to that one. Gold. Yeah, gold just has a history of 5,000 years, and Bitcoin hasn't proven the test of time. Let's call it that way. We should be interested in both, in the digitalization, in the cryptos, but we also should be interested in monetary history and what really has been. Yeah, gold is money. Everything else is credit. I see the cryptocurrencies more. It's open source. So if something is becoming too big, too successful, then you're going to have others jumping in. The right to fork. So it's in a constant environment which is dominated by competition. So to me, I would love to see cryptocurrencies in a very stable way, and you have a store of value. So you basically can sell your gold against the crypto, which is stable, and you can travel around the world and go back and forth. So I think that's a bit. I see that combination. No, that's that cryptos are a superior medium of exchange, but gold will remain, superior store of value.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Claudio. This has been a fascinating conversation that spanned the globe and spanned everything from history to lockdown to money to society to political principles and philosophy. It's been a lot of fun. We should do this again sometime.
Hey, always a pleasure talking to you, Keith.
All righty. Thank you so much.
Thank you as well, and stay free.
You too. You too.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Ciao. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.